Hey, Fort Washington family, it is Pastor David Swan. Hey, we're back together again to continue our spiritual growth journey. We've been talking about spiritual growth for several sessions now, walking through several disciplines to really help us mature spiritually. And again, as we've been doing throughout these sessions, we want to start with our three pillars or our three reminders about spiritual growth. One, spiritual growth does not happen automatically. Don't get discouraged if it's not a light switch you can turn on and just grow spiritually. Spiritual growth does not happen quickly. It's going to take some time. It's a process. It's a journey, a lifelong journey. We're going to continue growing spiritually. And then lastly, it does not happen without discipline. Again, no coincidence that the word disciple and the word discipline have the same word root. We need to be disciplined in order to grow spiritually. So last time we were together, we talked about this whole concept of exercise, spiritual exercise in the way of our service, serving others, that we were not saved by serving, but we were saved to serve. We really need to serve others. So again, making another parallel between or another connection between the physical and the spiritual. Today, I want to talk about this idea of protection. If you want anything to grow, you protect it, okay? There are certain plants that can't be planted in certain areas because they need to be protected. They need to be in a certain soil, in a certain climate. If you want that plant to grow, it needs to be protected. For any parents, making connections to parents often throughout the series, the idea of growth. We want to see our children grow by protecting them, nurturing them, and take care of them. So how do we protect ourselves? We protect ourselves spiritually by resisting temptation. I want to start by giving you a verse, Matthew 26, the 41st verse, and it says, "Keep watch and pray so that you will not give into temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Cannot think of a more accurate or more appropriate verse to use as we talk about temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body or the flesh is weak. We often have desires and designs to want to do other things. Even Paul says that he wants to do, he does what he doesn't want to do and ends up not doing what he wants to do. The flesh is weak, the body is weak. And the tagline or the statement to underscore, to foot stomp that verse, temptation succeeds when your heart is unprepared for it. Temptation succeeds when your heart is unprepared for it. When you can think of any time in life when you succumb to temptation, maybe you ate something you shouldn't have, you went somewhere you shouldn't have, you talked to someone you shouldn't have, you did something you shouldn't have done, your heart was not prepared to resist the temptation of whatever that thing was. So I want to give us three things to recognize as we try to protect ourselves and resist temptation. The first thing we need to recognize is the source of temptation. Sin always begins in the mind. Sin always begins in the mind. Proverbs chapter 19, the 3rd verse. Very, very brief statement, but very accurate statement. People ruin their lives by their own foolishness and then are angry at the Lord. Temptation's source is really ourselves. Like, it comes from within. It's our own sinful desires. It's our own sinful nature, all right? And often, although we're encouraged by the idea that Christ was also tempted, shortly after he was baptized and began his ministry, Satan took him out into the wilderness. He was out in the wilderness and he was tempted to do a number of things. And obviously he didn't succumb because he's 100% divine and completely God. But we don't want to always make a one-to-one parallel with Christ's temptation and ours, because he did not have the innate desire to sin that we have as flawed, imperfect humans. So you want to guard yourself against that. Recognize the source of temptation. And certainly, although we're encouraged by passages in like Romans chapter 6, verse 6, it tells us that our old sinful selves were crucified. Or 2 Corinthians 5:17 tells us that the old life is gone These are great things to encourage us to move forward, but we don't want to be lulled into a false sense of security by believing that, okay, because I've given my life to Christ, I magically won't want to do any evil things anymore. No, the evil resides within us, and we're going to be tempted by those things until we are no longer in this earth suit, this limited fleshly vessel of our physical bodies. We're going to continue to be tempted by the desires of our hearts. Recognize the force of temptation. Recognize its force. This is going to be kind of similar to the source, but the force in that it's not an external enemy. This force is within us. I don't know if there are any Star Wars fans that are watching this right now, but one of the taglines throughout Star Wars is, "May the force be with you." The force is unfortunately with us and in us. The force to be tempted to do all sorts of things that we have no business doing. We house the root to our own destruction. When you think about that, like the thing that gets us in the most trouble is already within us. Sometimes the enemy or the thing that trips you up the most is staring at you in the mirror every morning. We are, and many times, our own worst critic, but our own worst enemy as well. We can be powerful and deceptive with our emotions. We can feel something and then want to do something versus actually being committed to something else. And this is certainly, I use the word commitment purposefully because this is something that I want to draw a parallel to the committed and married couples out there, where maybe a day you feel something for someone else, or you don't feel the way that you'd like to feel about your spouse. I want to remind you of the commitment that you made before others and in the presence of God to not succumb to those feelings, but to be reminded of your commitment. Reminded of your commitment to your Lord and Savior, and not succumb to the powerful emotions associated with what you're tempted by. And our eternal desires are like seeds. No seed, we've been using the core idea, we've talked about plants a lot because we're talking about the idea of growth. I don't care what you plant. Maybe a cactus doesn't need much water, but most plants need to be fed to grow. And even the cactus is going to get some kind of food from somewhere, even if it's not from water. Are you going to feed the seed of that internal desire? So if you have a desire, maybe you have a sweet tooth, just don't even walk into Baskin Robbins. Don't even go down the bakery aisle of the grocery store when you're there. Why are you giving that internal desire any life? Why are you letting that seed grow? Why are you letting it mature? Okay. So we need to recognize its source. We need to recognize its force. And then you're going to see the alliteration or the rhyme style. We want to recognize its course. Recognize its course. How temptation actually builds into something else. So sin is like a stress fracture. I don't know if you know what a stress fracture is. There's a number of basketball players get them. A lot of athletes get them. The idea is by doing something over and over and over again. So a basketball player jumping over and over and over again. Sometimes they can have stress fractures in one of their leg bones, where basically it's a small crack in the bone of, maybe the shin. I don't know the exact bones. My wife would be upset with me right now. The physical therapist, her, like, how do you not know what the femur is? But there are certain bones, they can get a slight fracture from repeated use, from stress, okay? And so that stress fracture initially only occurs when you're stressed. But over time, if a basketball player, for example, has a stress fracture and he or she continues to play, that stress fracture becomes a full-on break, and now it needs to be repaired, it needs to be healed, okay? So initially, I'm only tempted when I'm stressed. I'm stressed about something, so now I'm tempted to, I'm tempted to go to the bar, or I'm tempted to go to food, or I'm tempted to use retail therapy, or I'm tempted to act out sexually, or whatever the case may be. I'm tempted when I'm stressed, but if I keep doing that over time, it's gonna become a regular occurrence. I'm not gonna be drinking while I'm stressed. I'm gonna be drinking every day. I'm not gonna be smoking because I'm stressed. I'm gonna be smoking every day. I'm not gonna be helping to self-medicate with retail therapy when I'm stressed or overwhelmed. I'm just gonna be having new Amazon packages show up at the door every day because that's what makes me feel better. So we want to be careful at the course of this temptation, how it bubbles, how it grows, how it matures. So we recognize the source, we recognize the force, we recognize the course. So we recognize these things. We know what it is, we know where it's coming from. How do we overcome it? Well, let's look at some tools and how we overcome it. First, you gotta study and know yourself. You gotta know what you can handle and know what you can't. For example, I used the analogy of a sweet tooth before. I remember years ago, my wife and I went to dinner. I don't know if Pastor Battle and PJ even remember this. We went to dinner with Pastor Battle and Pastor Joe. And I want to say it was during Lent, and there was the conversation about what each person was giving up, what we were kind of fasting from or sacrificing during that time. And because they both have sweet tooths, my wife and Pastor Battle were both doing away with sweets during this season. PJ and I don't really have that same vice. Like, I like a dessert from time to time, but it was no big deal to me. And so at dinner, we both ordered dessert. And we were just enjoying our cake, whatever it was that we ordered, while Pastor Battle and my wife were both like, so you guys know that we're giving this up and you're just gonna order it to eat this in front of us. But you have to know yourself, know how you're tempted, and try to avoid those situations. Develop strategies, and to be quite honest, develop a distrust in yourself. And if there's an area where I'm tempted, I don't trust myself in that area. I cling desperately to God in that area. I don't trust myself to do the right thing with this particular area that I'm tempted by. So I'm gonna really, really, really depend on God and try to avoid tempting situations. I'm gonna have a predetermined commitment, have an exit route. So if you find yourself, I hate to keep going back to the food analogies, but food is a great analogy that lands with everyone. So if you struggle with your diet or eating the right things, just tell yourself, okay, I'm going to this dinner party. It's a buffet. There's gonna be hors d'oeuvres. There's gonna be a lot of things. Just plan a strategy. Know, okay, if I see something that I'm tempted by and don't wanna eat, I'm just gonna go to the restaurant. Or I'm gonna go have a conversation with somebody. Or I'm gonna go drink some water. But have a strategy in mind that when that temptation comes up, I can fall right back to the strategy and know exactly where I'd like to be. The way you start tends to be the way you finish with any activity. So again, if you have this exit strategy in mind, you'll be prepared when the temptation arises. And keep before you really the gruesome end of temptation. There are certain temptations that are harmless, that are socially acceptable, but there are a lot of things that we can be tempted by that can really lead to death. Sometimes a spiritual death by separating us from Christ, and really in some cases a physical death. So if we keep that in mind, how serious some of these temptations can be, sometimes again, we can look at that destination, that final destination, if you will, and we won't even start down that path, all right? To tie a bow on this whole idea of temptation, I wanna leave you with this quote. This quote, I've used it, I've written it down, I've read it over and over, because to me, it encapsulates everything that we just talked about. I think it's gonna come on the screen, but just if you didn't take notes at all during this session, please write this down, refer to it, maybe print it out and put it on your bedroom mirror as you look at yourself, bathroom mirror, whatever, as you're getting ready for the day. Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. And watch your character, it becomes your destiny. We need to stay on watch, y'all, to always be prepared and be positioned to avoid temptation. So again, at the end of every session, we're always looking at ways to put this into practice. Looking at 3 levels, a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced way to put this discipline that we're talking about into action. So first, if you're a beginner, maybe just start by writing a list. I talked about the idea of knowing yourself, knowing what you're tempted by. Just make a list of temptations. Keep it in your phone, refer to it, to remind yourself that even if you're doing well, even if I'm growing spiritually, remind yourself of how vulnerable, how weak we are. The flesh, the body is weak. Remind yourself of that. Maybe you want to join, if you're an intermediate, I know myself, but I really want to go to the next level. Find a support group. Obviously, we know of some of the more common vices. There are things like Alcoholics Anonymous, and there are drug rehab, but maybe, you can find an accountability partner or a group to hold you accountable in a particular area. If it's maybe a sexual integrity issue, you can find other men. You can join a small group. I know that there are some groups even at Zion Church for men and even women to go through this idea of staying clean or purifying yourself from a sexual standpoint. And maybe, you know what, I'm ready to take things further. And I love the idea of what I call a temptation prayer filter, where every day we're gonna go before this throne, we're gonna go before our Lord and Savior and ask for help. Call out, speak to these temptations, call them out on a daily basis, pray about them even when they occur. Maybe you can even go, for those of you who are techie, you can go a bit further and put some technology on your phone that when you get to places or when you go to places you shouldn't be, and if you have trouble with the sweet tooth, if your phone finds out that you're in Baskin Robbins, it can do something. If you, whatever the case may be, but something that can help you when those situations arise, to really be on guard, to really be always in a position poised and ready to avoid temptation, again with the idea of protecting ourselves to promote and foster our spiritual growth. I hope that you've been blessed by this. I hope that you're ready to recognize the source, force, and course of temptation so that we can overcome it as we endeavor to grow spiritually. I hope you were blessed by this. Have a good day and God bless.